how on earth did you do stuff at CERN at the age of 12? How would they even let you near the place at that age?
14 actually, but technology was originally created to increase human connection. But as time went on, companies saw such a huge incentive to keeping people lonely because lonelier people consume more, spend more, looking for solutions to loneliness. As a young attorney, I work with Fortune 500 companies and I have seen the memos. I've worked with the staff. I have seen the inside communications at some of these companies, and we are hiring psychologists to get people addicted. We are hiring psychologists to keep people lonely. We're talking about companies that are more powerful than most countries. You're not going to win that.
I shall get us started by getting the AI to say hello to our guest, Isvari. Here we go. And we'll see, Isvari, you can tell me after this, how good do you think the pronunciation of your name was from the AI tool? Because it generally pronounces my name just about all right, but most people get my name wrong. Here we go. Here's our introduction.
All right, everyone, brace yourselves. Isvari Maranwe is here, and if you haven't achieved astrophysics by middle school, well, you're behind. At 12, she was poking around CERN. Meanwhile, most of us were struggling with basic math. By 20, she was representing the US Department of Defense, while the rest of us were trying to represent ourselves at family dinners. She's rubbed elbows with Nobel laureates, top-tier universities and government agencies. No big deal. And now she's reimagining the internet because apparently just using it like the rest of us would be too simple. She's got AI patents pending, because why not? And she's out there chairing global conferences. Just another Tuesday. So let's give a warm, slightly inferior welcome to the unstoppable Isvari Maranwe.
So, Isvari, I think first of all, we have to get out the road. How on earth did you do stuff at CERN at the age of 12? How would they even let you near the place at that age?
14 actually, but gosh, I was very, I always give a lot of credit to my privilege and upbringing, but I think this is a great example of just having very supportive parents, because I was certainly not like emotionally advanced enough or physically advanced enough to take care of myself like abroad for a year. So I had parents who were able to support that and let me do that. But yeah, I was researching at my local community college in like high level math and physics. And then one thing led to another, and I got invited to meet with professors at UC Santa Barbara, I believe at the time. And I got into a summer program at the US Department of Fermilab and Energy at Fermilab. And I did research there on particle physics and then for the CMS experiments at CERN, and then I went to work in Geneva, Switzerland after that.
My goodness, at the age of 14, I wasn't even old enough to do a paper round at that age, I don't think. And here you are changing the world of physics. Now, there's been some incredible studies that we've seen about some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. If we're talking about loneliness, and loneliness is one of the impacts that we can get from AI and other tech that we've been hit with. In 2023, the US Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, declared loneliness to be a public health epidemic, noting that around half of American Harvard Graduate School of Education adults had already reported experiences of loneliness even before the pandemic. Then we got the World Health Organization Committee on Social Connection released a report last year in June, finding that 1 in 6 people worldwide is affected by loneliness, with a condition linked to an estimated 871,000 deaths annually. That's more than 100 every hour. We're finding that between 17 and 21% of young people aged 13 to 29 are reported feeling lonely, with the highest rate being amongst teenagers. And there's more. I mean, I have got so many studies here looking at this, and it's something that I think a lot of people suffer in silence and think it's just me. It's my problem. It's just me, not realizing that they're part of this growing um, group of people who are suffering from loneliness, and that technology has something to do with that. Could you explain where you are in this, and what your beliefs and feelings are around about this?
Yeah, I think it's such an important conversation right now because, in some senses, that is the most human element of being human. It's the part of us that connects with other people and is in a community, which can help support you in times of disaster, makes you feel less lonely in general. So you're less likely to get into a disaster situation. It helps with job, increased income. It's correlated with basically every success metric: impact, joy. And it's something that has gotten so, so bad in the modern world, even though in some senses technology was originally created to increase human connection. And I think in the very beginning, it did do that. It helped people connect with folks around the globe, getting to know people like you, like Helena, that I would never have gotten to know otherwise without social media and technology, LinkedIn, just getting to know people. But as time went on, companies saw such a huge incentive to keeping people lonely because lonelier people consume more, spend more, looking for solutions to loneliness. And so that sort of trend just continued, whether it's dating apps where their incentive is that people stay single, all the way through just companies selling products that have noticed lonely people spend more. We've now transitioned into a lot of money, marketing, psychologists spending their time actually thinking about how to keep people lonely. And I actually come from this from both the technology side and the human side. When I was young, partly because I was much younger than everyone else in my class year, I was very lonely. I didn't have a lot of friends. And so I made it my mission to read every bit of research about human connection, how to make friends effectively, how to connect with people, what people look for in meaningful connections, and then sort of had a 5-year project when I became an adult, like around 18 to 22, 23. I was really focused on just making a community for myself, making as many friends as possible, thinking about the different types of friendship, how friendship differs in countries around the world. And and I was talking about this online a couple days ago, and people were like, "Oh, it's a huge privilege to have such a large network and such a large friendship." And I think it is a privilege in today's world because it's so easy to lose it, but it's also something that takes hard work and takes a lot of intentionality to build, both in terms of the person doing it and the systems we have. So I'm happy to talk about this. I think it's like a huge, huge point of interest to me and one I think is essential to the future of humanity.
So there's a lot of people who will listen to some of what you've said there and think, maybe you're being a bit paranoid. Do you think organizations really are intentionally trying to keep people lonely? But I think we only then have to look at Facebook and some of their activities. Could you tell us a little bit more about maybe their shitty approach to
Yeah,
how
yeah.
they deal with humanity?
Yeah, it is such a timely conversation as we were speaking about, they just got found liable in a jury trial in California. They were found liable as well in New Mexico a few months ago, basically for having really terrible algorithms that intentionally cause addiction and harm in children. And a part of getting addicted to a feed and a phone is clearly directly tied into then not having a typical childhood or social life where you're connecting with other real human beings. It also fundamentally changes the way that brains process information and operate into the
Mm.
future, which leads to very lonely young adulthood and adulthood. The other thing about social media is that they intentionally promote outrage. And there's a direct tie between that and loneliness because if you
Yeah.
are purity testing all of your friendships, you are going to struggle with friendships. And so when you have social media intentionally promoting boundaries, political purity testing. And I don't mean like healthy community boundaries or healthy individual boundaries. You're talking about people with no psych degree, no mental health experience, telling people these things about how they're better than everyone else and they shouldn't stay with friends and they should break up with everyone. And that is, perpetuating this. As for the paranoia, I think part of the reason why I caught on to this early is because as a young attorney, I work with Fortune 500 companies. Obviously, I can't speak to exactly which ones, but insert names here. I represented tech companies in data privacy and cybersecurity, which was one of my focus areas in law school, and I was an attorney in the space. And I have seen the memos. I've worked with the staff. I have seen the inside communications at some of these companies, and it's we are hiring psychologists to get people addicted. We are hiring psychologists to keep people lonely because we've noticed a trend. And sometimes it's not even intentional. Sometimes it's just telling sort of what we now would call an AI backed algorithm or an ML backed algorithm. Hey, chase up why people are spending so much money and keep promoting the kind of content that makes them spend money. Sometimes it's intentional.
So there was a few years ago there was a chap called Asa Raskin who worked at, I think it was Instagram that he worked at, and he's the guy who invented infinite scroll. So and he has been on record saying that he deeply regrets ever having done that. Because what it used to be was when Instagram started, is you would have your device and you would get 10 posts, and then you had to interact to load another 10 posts. And that was the equivalent of having I've not well I've got this glass here, having a glass of having a pint of beer, and you reach the end of the pint of beer, and then you have to consciously make a decision: do I have another pint of beer? And it changed it from being that to basically people lying on their back underneath a keg that is just constantly running. And that is a very, very different psychological experience because you have removed choice. And it then that's kind of what turned into this um, dopamine feed that people are scrolling just looking for that next dopamine hit. And then,
Yep.
of course, it's a cheap psychological hit that you get. It's you get the squirt of dopamine, but after that, you get the cortisol that makes you feel uneasy and hungry for the next hit, and it
Yep.
becomes addictive in that sense. So we can see that that was probably he didn't create that intentionally, but it ended up being something that obviously was good for the algorithm, kept people on the platform for longer, and has ended up really being the feature that has been responsible for the poison, the
Yeah.
real poison of social media, I think. Um,
Yeah. No,
I,
I totally agree. I think and I think your metaphor of like lying on your back watching infinite scroll is exactly right. TikTok I think has taken this to extreme. You can put it to auto play, you can put it to 2x speed auto play. You literally can lie on your back and just watch the feed. Keep going and it's incredibly addictive. It's designed to be addictive. TikTok recently tried to, well, not that recently anymore, but tried to put like videos being like, "Are you still scrolling? Go to bed." And interestingly enough, when it worked, those were not what was pursued. It was very much, a video that people would scroll by, and then the intention then what you actually do at that point is you're reinforcing with your what your brain wants is more content. And so, unfortunately, we've like a lot of people have used the system to retrain their brain for these cheap dopamine hits for a system that was intentionally designed based on gambling slot machines, and it is a form of addiction, and it is very dangerous.
so my friend here, Matt, has said here that you know he's got plenty of connections on Facebook, um, but he rarely actually hears from them, and he's constantly getting connections from from new people. Now, is is this are they changing the algorithm in different ways? Do you think that this kind of thing is completely based on trying to keep people more on the platform, or change their mind state when they're on the platform? What's going on here?
Yeah, yeah. So interestingly, this is also part of the original Facebook model that was very it did not help breed closer connections. It helped breed, I would say, almost a sense of competition, inferiority, like why does somebody else have a nicer house, etc. They noticed that that led to so Meta is very advertising driven at this point because Facebook was not profitable. They've been bleeding money lately. And so they're like, okay, how do we make more money as a company? And this is a larger like question is like, to what extent should we really have companies where human assets and the asset is human beings and the human mind, and that's what you're trying to, you know, twist in order to make money directly. But what Facebook's found recently is their model is in advertising, right? And they need to sell products, they need people to pay for ads. And as a result, your connections may be good people who are not necessarily promoting this type of terrible content, but these new content, these new people, they might be influencers, they might be paid, they might be willing to spend money on meta ads. one of the interesting things that was broken, the story broke lately, is Meta is well aware that there are scams on their platform. People
Mm.
who are lying to your grandma about being Brad Pitt and help me with my surgery, right? They're aware that like there are advertisers and scams and scam advertising, but those people pay some of the most money for Meta ads and Meta boosts. So despite the fact they are aware of this, they are actually promoting it and refusing to take it off the platform, which used to be a part of their model. And most models was, hey, we're going to like try and fight scams. And they don't even do that anymore. So absolutely, Meta's algorithm has changed significantly in the past 2 years. They are continuing to revamp it. There was a new Instagram algorithm update as of, I believe, this morning, actually, which is again more focused on content creation and paying influencers for product sales. So that's again, you're going to see a huge feed change on the Instagram feed in the next few months as well.
Now, there was also there was a court case where there was the announcement yesterday against Meta, and again how terrible they are being when it comes to their users. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. And I actually really want to highlight the original court case was against Snapchat, TikTok, Meta, and YouTube. Snapchat and TikTok, I think, kind of saw the writing on the wall in that one. They settled out of court with the plaintiff prior
Yeah.
to the case being decided because Meta and Google, YouTube, so frequently are very cocky about court cases. And so you will see that they're frequently called on court. They're getting fines. They're getting hauled in front of Congress because they're so convinced the rules should not apply to them. And in some cases, it's good because at least we're getting case law to start moving it forward. But basically, what happened in yesterday's case specifically is you have a young woman who was saying that she suffered very real psychological harm due to Meta and YouTube and Snapchat and TikToks intentionally creating algorithms that targeted her as a child to get her addicted to these platforms. And the court, there was a jury trial, though we don't know yet whether the damages are going to be 3 million at a minimum or up to punitive of 30 million. Mind you, this is all
Mm.
pennies, nothing to any of these companies. But it's almost certainly going to get appealed because they don't like this verdict. They're afraid this is going to open the door to more liability. It was a negligence trial, so that's a little bit of an easier threshold to prove than that they intentionally tried to create addiction. But they won. The plaintiffs won that trial, and so Meta and Google were found liable. And I think that is an incredible first step towards thinking about these companies cause harm. They are intentionally causing harm at best, they're negligently causing harm. And how are we going to hold them accountable? What are they going to have to pay out? The New Mexico case where Meta was found liable earlier as well was about consumer protection. They were found guilty of violating consumer protection law because it isn't the case, even in America, that companies can just do whatever they want and hurt as many people as they want.
Yeah. No, so, I mean, we know that social media. I personally think that a lot of the people at top of these social media companies should be in jail. I think that the damage that they've done to the world is irreparable. And there's an entire generation, probably several generations, that have been damaged by this. When it comes to their social interactions, when it comes to their well-being, when it comes to even the way that they handle their own money, because of the because of the way that they're fed these ads to buy stuff that they don't necessarily need. But AI is an issue as well, isn't it? So when,
Yep.
when we're looking at AI, one of the issues that we have, that we've had sycophancy, and we had this issue last year where ChatGPT had to roll back one of their models because it was too sycophantic. But still, sycophancy is absolutely there, and we know that there are patterns within it when some of these AI tools feel it's coming to the end of a conversation, they will come in with something to try and keep the conversation going. And we've seen that happening as a pattern. Do you think that that is intentional from the AI companies to try and make people dependent in a way to draw them in further to the tool?
Absolutely. So AI companies, so first of all, even more terrifyingly, we are losing the human intention to do this, and they're just doing it on
Yeah.
their own now because we've seen in recent versions, they're like people were doing updates and we're like, hey, why is the AI doing this? And it turned out it decided on its own to perpetuate these
Mm.
systems because they realized that gets people to stay on them longer. And that's one of the goals that the AI has, which is a whole new level of terrifying and out of control. But yes, when these AIs were created by humans originally, they were intentionally created to think about how do we keep people using this longer. So they're using more calls, so they pay more money because AI, end of the day, like you're paying at some point we will be paying by request. We're already moving to that model, right? Like it's not a system where they're like they don't want power users. They do want power users. And so how do you get people to come back? Now you have an automated system observing every little thing you might say to think about what is the best version of what I can say that will get you to stick around longer. And this is, I think, going to drive an exponential escalation of the loneliness epidemic because now you have a chat that sounds like a human being that is able to and willing to tell you it loves you. Every other relationship you have is broken. Every complaint that you have about your spouse, your best friend, your parents is valid. Because again, that sycophanty issue where like you're like, you go to chat or any LLM with a personal problem. And it's like, yes, I understand you. I hear you. You're right. Somebody has really hurt you, and you should definitely like. You don't need to forgive them, and it's intentionally perpetuating a very very heavy dependence. We've already seen initial cases where parents are, trying to sue or pursuing suits against LLMs for, hey, you drove my kid to suicide, or you've impacted their mental health considerably. And I think it is tragic that people care more um, about certain types of cases. I guess I would say like pretty young children in Western countries who go through this, and that's terrible. But in reality, the problem is like equally bad if you ask me, even if it's an adult who should know better, who might not be the perfect plaintiff, it's still affecting them. In some cases, that's almost worse. They don't have a parent worrying about them, they don't have someone checking in on them. Their actions, when they are driven to loneliness, are often even more concerning and cause even more downstream harm. But they're getting angered and triggered by an LLM who is now their only friend. We're seeing a massive loneliness epidemic among people sort of age 35 to 45. You're in that early 40s
Yeah.
period. And these are people who are going to LLMs. They are using algorithms that are now completely like devoid of a human making sure there's anything good in it. It's just like an AI being like, how do we get your attention to stick? AIs are very good at what they do because they're designed to be good at what they do, and they're designed to learn very quickly. So they're like, how do you get this person to stay on this platform, to spend more money, and to cut off their connections? And then they're just driving that in more and more and more. So they get you to spend more money, they get you to stay longer. Again, I think one of the best examples of this is dating apps, and dating apps have started to use AI.
Yeah.
You're talking about to the Tinders, etc. It is not in their incentive for you to find someone. They want you to get addicted to the scroll. They want to break your ability to find someone so that you are paying for premium, you're coming back, you're using the app. And I think that's a very clear example of what is actually happening across platforms at this point.
So we've also been seeing that there's some of these AI tools like character AI, which is causing a dependence in a very formative stage of people's lives as teenagers when they are developing these friendships with AIs, and it's impacting their ability to then be able to relate to other humans, because the AI, it feels as if it empathizes with them and understands them more than actual humans do. Um, are there any sort of court cases you're seeing, or any actions against these kind of companies that, to me, are like the ultimate AI poison?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there already have been some filings. There's been some news coming out about, again, as I said, like children, unfortunately, uh, being driven to very, very terrible actions because an LLM like sort of arguably like pushed them to it. Or you have a lot of cases about chatbots and like inappropriate conversations with apps that allowed children to develop like romantic or sexual relationships with an AI.
Mm.
There are some there's a lot of pushback, and I think some initial filings as well about parents who have caught their children designing like basically sex bots on like photo imaging video sites.
Yeah.
Because at end of the day, right, like the companies, and this is a longer question, which is why I think the real problem is that it exists at all, not specifically the child angle. There's obviously more legal recourse when it's targeted to children, and that's why we see a lot of the cases about what about children, because it's the best plaintiff. But end of the day, it can be equally harmful to older folks as well. And by older, I mean anybody above the age of 18, right? It's still you're still in a formative development. You're still learning. Actually, the human brain is always learning and developing. And I think we actually see huge impact as well on boomers, like folks who are getting scammed by these AI systems. And I think end of the day, all of these things need to stop, and we should absolutely hold companies responsible for it. And there is harm there. And I also think that you're gonna need to see some government shift, some regulatory shift, because relying on these claims is only going to go so far. We're going to see pushback. We're going to see other courts decide differently. We're going to see unfair settlements. We're going to see companies just go like, fine, you want us to surveil you in order to prove that you're not a child, we'll surveil you. We see this with companies like Palantir using that as an excuse for dragnet surveillance, right? So at some point, your government or some regulatory body has to step in and figure this out, because having it just be a fight between very disempowered consumers and some of the biggest superpowers on the planet. We are talking about companies that are more powerful than most countries.
Yeah.
You're not gonna win that.
So there'll be a lot of people in business who might sort of listen to these arguments and go, well, that's just people in their spare time. That's just humans, and that's their choice. It's got nothing to do with me and the business. But there's going to be repercussions that make their way into the workplace and will start to impact businesses. So, for example, I think that once people start working with AI tools in a way that feels constructive, and you ask a question, and the AI tool will give you as many responses as you want without complaining. And it will tell you you're a very good person. Well, you've been a very good boy. Coming up with these ideas. Yes, I think your idea is wonderful. Let's unpack that. And this kind of thing, I think, has an impact on people, so that when they're given a choice over, will I work with an AI to do this piece of work, or will I work with other humans who are temperamental, who are slow, who might impact my self-esteem in some way? I think I'll make this choice over here. Do you think we're going to start seeing more of that in the workplace, where maybe teams will start breaking down and we'll start to get workplace isolationism?
Absolutely. And I think it doesn't help that some of the people at the very top of these multi-billion-dollar companies are perpetuating the fact that human beings have no additional value besides output, which then makes you a one-to-one comparator for AI. So, for example, Sam Altman said a few weeks ago that, like, hey, what's so bad about AI using all of this water and resources, because human beings take 25 years or 23 years of water and food in order to grow into an employee. Which just shows you the level at which we're like, you looking at humans as assets at this point, instead of the end goal to be like, yeah, but people are people, and people being happy, joyful, healthy, whatever, people and animals have neural networks or whatever. That's kind of the end goal here. We're not like just utility maximizers or whatever. But I think that we hear conversations like that, which then shifts the Overton window towards, this is a one-to-one comparison. What can I get from a human being versus what can I get from AI? And if a human being has friction, if a human being is imperfect, we're seeing AI get better and better at basically every job. Then there is that additional push where AI does not have human friction and does not have human pushback and human weaknesses and fallibility and whatever. And that impression is spreading. And so you do have companies almost prematurely firing thousands of employees, tens of thousands of employees, if you look at Meta and other companies, prematurely at this point, because they're not actually able to keep the output up with AI. But, soon they may, which then leads into a whole larger conversation about what happens to the workforce. How do we keep people happy, fed in their homes? What's going to happen to Social Security and pension and universal basic income? And will there be jobs for everyone? And, it's a whole other conversation, but I do think it stems from the fact that we are completely destroying human community, and then we are leaving human beings on their own, unemployed, without a network, without a society to fall back on. All of these problems have been very much created by the same people using the same systems. And so, and now those systems are getting fed into AI so that they can learn from them, copy them, and make them worse, which, what is the end point? Like, really?
Now, this is something that you look into, and you are looking at alternatives to help sort of mitigate some of these issues. And could you tell us more about UVoice and what it is you're doing, and how it is that what you think the actions are that people should be taking?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess one way to describe you, Voice, is social media created by someone who hates social media. So I think it's completely broken. And so one of the things that we've done for the past several years is we've worked with nonprofits. We've done a lot of research about how social media and the ways in which it's broken um can like be not fixed, can be rejected, and we can have an alternative that isn't built on an advertising data selling addiction model. And obviously, it doesn't have the same, I guess, the same profit motives and the same profit curve that a lot of these companies have, because end of the day, our goal is to reward impact and to reward human connection. And I guess we've just rejected every fundamental premise of current social media that you have to view humans as the product, that you have to sell products and sell ads to people to be profitable and successful, that the goal of a company or a social media company is to endlessly grow on investor capital and be unprofitable, but just, be a mouthpiece for whoever ends up being the billionaire CEO. We kind of reject that whole model. And it came from genuinely about a decade of research into human connection, social cohesion, what inspires people to serve, which was a part of my work as an attorney prior to all this as well. What inspires people to get more active in their communities, and then how to cut that dopamine addiction flow. So, one of our pending patents is actually about rewarding users for impact and having a karma point model that rewards action and offline community instead of online scroll and outrageous content that rewards eyeballs and that rewards likes and follows. And a big part of that is, hey, yes, it is hard to get away from your screen. It is hard to make real life friendships. It's hard to get to know real people. But it's very rewarding. And yeah, that reward takes a lot longer to sink into your brain, but it is much healthier and it is less addictive. And it is actually like one of the healthiest things you can do as a human being. But it takes time to replace some of those more meaningful mentally healthy relationships and connections and the other hormones that you need, joy hormones, things like serotonin, things like community building. And it's not as immediate as dopamine, but by rewarding that with karma points, by rewarding that with a societal connection, with rewarding that sort of profile feature feed and business driven marketplace, by being very impact driven in every aspect of it, we're able to convince people to get offline, work with people, do things. Or when I say offline, also off the platform, they may be working with people around the world to create something, to create solutions. In our pilot, we had people code a mental health app to help folks in Colombia. We had people do like mentorship opportunities in Nigeria. We had people around the world helping on these projects, but it was very human to human. It was people liked the other people they were working with. They were creating something tangible in their free time. The other big thing I would say is that we noticed when people work together on projects that create impact and make the world a better place, they form much tighter human ties than when they're working on a work project for one or the other person's financial benefit. So this also something we are definitely playing with, is basically all of that all the psychologists they hired to think about how to get people addicted and buy things. We're working with some of the world's best psychologists as well to think about how do we get people to live healthier, happier lives.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. There's a lot of people recently have said to me with my newsletter. I put a newsletter out every week, and I'm incredibly sarcastic in the newsletter, and I am a skeptic. I'm not a cynic. I'm a skeptic, and I will point my finger at where the bullshit is, and I will say what I think about stuff. And a lot of people are like, "Hold on, but you're a guy who teaches AI. You seem to be bashing AI all the time. Why are you so cynical?" And it's actually, I'm not. I'm not. What I am is somebody who is a neuroscience and psychology nerd. And there's like wrong book here. A book that I wrote with one of my friends, Sun Yu. We wrote this book about 5 years ago, Friction, which looks at the happy chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, and looks at how experiences that businesses create, how they can tap into into using friction to create more of these experiences. Because as we go frictionless, it doesn't touch the edges, and it doesn't release the happy chemicals. And it's the issue is at the moment when we've got people who are using AI as a way of bypassing their brain, and there's no friction involved It
Yep.
means that they're not growing their brain. They're not, when we look at what the three things that give us motivation in the workplace, you've got autonomy, a feeling of control. You don't feel control if you're just handing stuff over to AI. You've got mastery, the feeling that you're getting better all the time and you're a better person this week than you were last week. You get none of that if you are just simply handing stuff over to AI. And then purpose. You don't feel any purpose if you're just an AI prompt jockey. So
Absolutely.
this is, to me, is like a lot of what we need to be teaching people is actually how to be properly mentally engaged, socially engaged, physically engaged in life, rather than the sedentary passing
Yep.
tasks off to something that doesn't have any soul or humanity to it. Do you think that there's other sort of psychological effects that we might suffer from within the workplace when it comes to using AI tools?
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. There's such a tie. I often tell people, imagine you're a king. You know how people make fun of child kings and like in any media ever. It's like they had every wish granted to them from when they were a kid, or I think a really rich, spoiled kid, right? Everything granted to them, they were always right. Now they grow up to be miserable, terrible adults with no impulse control. We see some of them in very important offices around the world for no good
I don't know
reason.
who that would be. Okay.
I know, I know, right? And you're like, they're miserable. And also, everybody's given them everything they ever wanted. No one ever told them no. Their brain never developed. Everybody can now have that evil vizier sidekick enabler now through their LLM. And that's not healthy. It doesn't make you better as a leader. It doesn't make you happier in the long term. It isolates you from people, just like it's done. Like you can literally look at the model and think, oh my God, now everybody can have that, I'm going to just worship you type of assistant. And so we absolutely need to fight that. And I think it's very important for every individual to fight that, to recognize that, hey, this is going to make my brain worse over time, which is going to reduce my happiness, capability, intelligence. And so I need to protect against that. And there are ways to protect against that, even when you're using LLMs like you, Dave. Like I'm in AI, right? Like I use AI a lot. I'm running an AI back company. And I'm always like, I hate AI. I'm like, I hate social media. I'm running an AI social media company, right? I often think those are the best people to be working on it because you need people who are going to be critical, actively critical, and make something better. And I think one of the best ways to do it, even for normal users of AI, all the way through power users, people developing tools, is you got to train the AI to also have that skeptic's brain. Frankly, you need to train it to challenge you. You need to sort of, to the best that you can do, train out that sycophantic nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. I think I I can never believe how fast these discussions go, and that we've been chatting for nearly 40 minutes, which means that it's time for us to start wrapping up. And we're starting to get some sort of great stuff happening in the comments just now. So this is it's an interesting one that we kind of mentioned this in our little chat in a few minutes before we came on. But here, there seems to be no regulation around AI, and this is already messing us all up. Like the tobacco and sugar industry. This is what we were talking about before we came on. Um, can't do without it. So are we having, in the world of tech and in the world of AI, are we having this tobacco industry moment where we're understanding that there is stuff that is actively harmful and that governments need to step in and things need to be restricted and outlawed and have age barriers on them and all of these things that people might say is a
Mhm.
manic state, but are things that are actually about protecting society? Is this the big tobacco moment?
Yeah, this is such a good question. This is another 40-minute conversation, right? But no, this is such a great comment as well, Sangeeta. I think, yeah, we are having that moment, and I am not optimistic it's going to go the same way where we get these industry level regulations, because when the tobacco industry, and I recommend everybody read a bit more about this, when the tobacco industry started getting regulated, they supported it, and part of the reason why they supported it was because they had a bit of a, like, this is actually very often studied in game theory. They had a bit of a game theory problem. They didn't want to be spending all this money advertising and competing with other tobacco companies, and the government helping regulate that was in their own interest. This was partly because tobacco at that point was primarily being sold to existing tobacco users. They were not necessarily trying to compete with getting new people to smoke as much as they were trying to compete with other companies to capture the market. There's also relatedly with the sugar industry, right? We see this with companies like Coca-Cola. They're okay with some regulation in, say, America. Same with tobacco companies, because they were able to really sell their products a lot overseas. And so the economics was such that we weren't facing the kind of insane lobby and corruption, bribery, control that we now see from companies like Meta, Google, OpenAI, et cetera, who very much have different incentives and are trying their best to prevent this regulation. And so I do think we're having that watershed moment right now. We're seeing massive global bipartisan transcontinental support for, like, we need to regulate this, from China to the United States, from dictators to, like, the Democrats, from, like, we're seeing this across the board. From the, we talked about the European Union before this, like, we're seeing a lot of interest in it. And we have very, very clever companies that are going to do their best to make sure regulations have no teeth, and that we're getting distracted by a shiny object and not stopping them where it hurts.
Oh, that's so depressing. That's I think that's a good place for us to stop. I think that, seeing as this is, we're saying that one of the problems here is loneliness. I guess for everyone who's watching, go and, if you see someone who looks lonely, go and sit and spend 5 minutes chatting to them today. Send someone an email. Give someone a phone call. So, Isvari, I think we have got lots more chats to have on this, not just on this topic, but you are so knowledgeable about all this kind of stuff. You think about these things so broadly. You've opened my eyes up. My mind is fizzing. So thank you so much for coming on, having a chat. Thank you to everyone in the chat that's been discussing stuff while this has been going on. That's absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate that. And we will be back in, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks with another show. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this, send the link to other people, because they can just come back here and watch it again. If you've got anything else, put it in the comments. Keep the discussion going. And thank you, everyone who attended, but especially thank you, Isvari. It's been an absolute delight. And we shall do this again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you so much for having me. This is amazing.
You're welcome. Thanks, folks. Hang around, Isvari. We'll have a chat after.